Welcome to Twist and Tale. In 1925, Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, and Jay Gatsby are lured to a haunted West Egg mansion by a sinister shadow thriving on their darkest secrets. Bleeding mirrors, whispering shadows, and a vengeful entity born of betrayal trap them in a deadly game. To survive, they must confess their sins or betray one another before the house claims their souls. Subscribe, comment, share, and like for more gripping stories. The fog clung to the streets of London like a shroud, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant chime of Big Ben. It was October 1925, and the air carried a chill that seeped into the bones, as if the city itself were shivering with foreboding. Hercule Poirot, his mustache impeccably waxed despite the damp, adjusted his overcoat and stepped cautiously onto the cobblestones of Baker Street. He had received a letter that morning, slipped under his door at an hour when no postman should have stirred. The envelope was black, edged with silver, and bore no return address. The message inside was brief, written in an elegant, almost archaic script. Monsieur Poirot, your intellect is required at West Egg, New York. A matter of utmost urgency awaits. Come alone. Passage arranged. The SS Elysium departs Southampton. Tomorrow at midnight, tell no one. No signature, no explanation. Only a single unsettling detail. A faint smudge of crimson at the letter's edge, too deliberate to be ink. Poirot's little gray cells buzzed with suspicion, but curiosity, his eternal vice, had already won. He was not a man to ignore a mystery, especially one that reeked of danger. Across the Atlantic in the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlor fire, knitting needles clicking rhythmically. Her own letter had arrived in a similar fashion, tucked into her garden gate at dawn. The same black envelope, the same silver trim, the same cryptic summons to West Egg. Unlike Poirot, Miss Marple's instincts leaned not toward curiosity but caution. She had seen enough of human nature to know that such invitations rarely came without peril. Yet the letter's final line had struck a chord. The truth lies where innocence is lost. It was a phrase that echoed a case from her youth, one she had never spoken of, even to her nephew Raymond. Someone knew her secrets, and that knowledge was a hook she could not ignore. Half a world away, Jay Gatsby stood on the balcony of his Long Island mansion, staring across the dark waters of the Sound toward the green light that flickered on Daisy Buchanan's dock. His letter had come not by post but by hand, delivered by a figure in a hooded cloak who vanished into the night before Gatsby could question him. The message was identical to the others, save for one addition. Your dream is not what it seems. Gatsby's heart, ever tethered to Daisy, faltered at those words. He had built his empire for her, but the letter's implication, that his dream might be a lie, stirred a dread he could not shake. Against his better judgment, he resolved to attend, if only to protect the illusion he had crafted. The SS Elysium was a ghost ship in all but name. Its hull was painted black, its decks silent save for the creak of timbers and the low moan of the wind. Poirot boarded at Southampton under a moonless sky, his cane tapping against the gangplank. The crew, shadowed figures with faces obscured by caps, spoke little and avoided his gaze. Miss Marple arrived from Dover, her small suitcase clutched tightly, her eyes scanning the other passengers for signs of deceit. Gatsby, boarding in New York, stood apart, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the ship's grim austerity. The three did not yet know each other, but their paths converged in the ship's grand saloon that first night, drawn together by a shared unease. The saloon was a cavern of opulence gone wrong. Crystal chandeliers hung crookedly, their light, dim and flickering, casting jagged shadows on the walls. The air smelled of salt and something sharper like old blood. A long table was set for dinner, but only 3 places were laid, each marked with a name card. H. Poirot, J. Marple, Jay Gatsby. The realization that they were the only passengers, or at least the only ones invited, settled over them like a fog. Poirot, ever the observer, noted the absence of mirrors in the room, an oddity for such a lavish setting. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her knitting bag. her mind cataloging the faint scratches on the table's edge, as if something had clawed at it. Gatsby, restless, paced to the window, his reflection distorted in the glass, his eyes catching a fleeting movement outside, a shape too large to be human, too fleeting to be certain. Dinner was served by a steward whose hands trembled as he poured wine. The food was exquisite but cold, as if prepared hours ago and left to decay. Conversation was stilted at first, each wary of revealing too much. Poirot broke the silence, his voice crisp. "Monsieur Gatsby, Mademoiselle Marple, it appears we have been summoned for a purpose. The question is by whom, and to what end?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with quiet sharpness. "I suspect, Monsieur Poirot, that our host knows more of us than we do of them. This letter," she tapped her reticule, "speaks of secrets I have not shared in decades." Gatsby, less guarded, leaned forward, his voice low. "Mine mentioned my dream. Whoever sent it knows things they shouldn't, things about her." His gaze drifted to the window again, and this time all three saw it. A shadow, elongated and wrong, sliding across the deck outside before vanishing into the fog. The ship lurched suddenly, a deep groan echoing from its bowels. The chandeliers swayed, and the wineglasses tipped, spilling crimson across the tablecloth. The steward gasped, dropping a tray, and fled the room without a word. Poirot rose, his mustache twitching. "This is no ordinary voyage, mes amis. We are not passengers, we are prey." The night deepened and the ship seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Footsteps echoed in empty corridors too heavy to belong to the crew. Whispers drifted through the walls, speaking in languages none of them recognized. Miss Marple, undeterred, suggested they search the ship for clues to their host's identity. Poirot agreed, proposing they split up to cover more ground, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Gatsby, haunted by the shadow he'd seen, insisted on staying together. "Whatever's out there," he said, "it's watching us. I can feel it." They chose to explore the lower decks, where the air grew colder and the walls glistened with damp. The corridors narrowed, the wood warped and stained as if the ship were rotting from within. Poirot's torch flickered, revealing strange symbols carved into the bulkheads, spirals and jagged lines that seemed to shift when stared at too long. Miss Marple paused at one, her lips pursing. "These are not mere decorations," she murmured. "They're warnings." A scream cut through the silence, high and guttural from somewhere deeper in the ship. The trio froze, their breaths visible in the sudden chill. Gatsby drew a revolver from his coat, his hand steady despite the fear in his eyes. "That wasn't human," he whispered. Poirot, ever logical, urged caution, but Miss Marple was already moving toward the sound. Her knitting needles clutched, like weapons. They found the source in the engine room, a vast chamber of rusted iron and flickering gauges. The steward who had served them dinner lay sprawled across the floor, his eyes wide with terror, his throat torn open. Above him, scrawled, in blood on the wall, were the words, "The truth lies where innocence is lost." Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers tracing the wound. "This was not done by a man," he said softly. "The precision, the savagery. It is unnatural." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the bloodied message, her mind racing. Gatsby, pale, muttered, "This is about her, it has to be." But neither Poirot nor Miss Marple pressed him for details. They all felt it now, the presence heavy and malevolent watching from the shadows. The ship shuddered again and the lights went out. In the darkness, something laughed, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. When the lights flickered back on, the body was gone, and the blood on the wall had vanished, leaving only the faint smell of decay. They returned to the saloon, shaken but resolute. Poirot locked the door, though he knew it would do little good. Miss Marple began sketching the symbols they'd seen, her hands steady despite the horror. Gatsby stood by the window, his revolver still drawn, staring into the fog. "We're not alone on this ship," he said, "and whatever's with us, it knows why we're here." As the clock struck midnight, a new envelope appeared on the table, black and silver, identical to the ones they'd received. Inside was a single sentence, "Welcome to West Egg, the game begins." The SS Elysium docked at dawn, its black hull cutting through the fog like a blade. The air over West Egg was heavy, laced with the salt of the Long Island Sound and something fouler, like the breath of a grave. Hercule Poirot stepped onto the pier, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the damp wood. His eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the desolate dock. No welcoming party, no porters, only a single lantern swinging in the wind, its flame guttering, as if afraid to burn too brightly. Miss Marple followed, her shawl drawn tight against the chill, her gaze lingering on the horizon where the fog seemed to pulse, almost alive. Jay Gatsby was last, his face pale, his hands clenched as he stared toward the green light across the water, now obscured by the mist. The black envelope from the saloon with its cryptic message, "Welcome to West Egg, the game begins," lay heavy in Poirot's pocket. The trio had barely slept after the horror in the engine room, their minds haunted by the steward's mangled body and the laughter that had echoed in the dark. They had agreed to stay together, bound by necessity and the shared dread that whatever had summoned them was far from finished. A car waited at the pier's end, a sleek Rolls-Royce with tinted windows and no driver in sight. The door opened silently as if beckoning them. Poirot hesitated, his mustache twitching. "This is no coincidence, mes amis. Our host has planned every detail." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly in her bag, a nervous habit she disguised as calm. Gatsby, his revolver still tucked beneath his coat, climbed in first, his voice tight. "If this is about Daisy, I need to know. Let's go." The drive to Gatsby's mansion was silent, the car gliding through streets lined with skeletal trees and houses that loomed like tombstones in the fog. West Egg, for all its wealth, felt abandoned, its opulence tainted by an unnatural stillness. The mansion itself was a beacon of light, its windows blazing against the gray dawn, but the warmth was deceptive. As they stepped through the grand doors, the air grew colder, and the scent of decay from the ship followed them inside. The foyer was a cathedral of excess, marble floors, gold-trimmed walls, and a chandelier that rivaled the Elysium's. Yet, the mirrors were covered with black cloth and the clocks had all stopped at midnight. A butler, gaunt and hollow-eyed, greeted them without a word, gesturing toward a drawing room where a fire crackled but gave no heat. 3 new envelopes waited on a mahogany table, each bearing their names in the same elegant script. Poirot opened his, reading aloud, "Tonight you dine with shadows. Find the truth before it finds you." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "This is a game, but not one of chance. Someone, or something, knows us too well." Gatsby tore open his envelope, his hands trembling. His message was different. "She is closer than you think." His eyes darted to the windows, searching for the green light, but the fog was impenetrable. The butler led them to a dining hall where a table was set for 12, though only their 3 places were marked. The other chairs were empty, yet each bore a name card, names none of them recognized: Eleanor Vance, Jonathan Harker, Annabel Lee. Poirot's fingers traced the edge of his card, his mind racing. These names, they are not random. They carry weight, perhaps from stories untold. Miss Marple nodded, her memory stirring with tales of tragedy she'd heard in St. Mary Mead, though she couldn't place the names precisely. Dinner was served by unseen hands, plates appearing as if from nowhere, filled with food that looked sumptuous but tasted of ash. The fire flickered, casting shadows that moved independently of the flames. Gatsby, restless, pushed his plate away. "This isn't right. The air, the house, it's all wrong, like it's alive." Poirot, ever analytical, noted the faint scratches on the table, identical to those on the Elysium. Miss Marple's gaze fixed on a portrait above the fireplace, a woman with eyes that seemed to follow them, her face pale, and her expression one of silent terror. As they ate, the house began to whisper. At first it was a low hum like wind through a cracked window, but it grew into voices, fragmented, overlapping, pleading. "Help us. It sees It knows. The trio froze, their eyes meeting. Poirot's voice was steady, but his knuckles were white around his cane. We are not alone, mes amis. This house is a stage, and we are its players. A sudden crash shattered the tension. A mirror in the corner previously covered had fallen, its cloth pooling like blood on the floor. The glass was intact, but it reflected not the room but a different scene. A dark forest, twisted trees clawing at a blood-red sky. Within the reflection, a figure moved, too tall, too thin, its limbs bending at unnatural angles. It turned, and though its face was obscured, its eyes burned with a malevolent intelligence. Gatsby stumbled back, his revolver drawn. What the hell is that? Miss Marple clutched her rosary, whispering a prayer, while Poirot stepped closer, his torch illuminating the mirror. The figure vanished, but the forest remained, its trees swaying as if beckoning. The butler reappeared, his face ashen. You mustn't look too long, he stammered. It sees you back. Before they could question him, he fled, his footsteps echoing into silence. Poirot turned to the others. This is no mere haunting, there is purpose here, a design we do not yet understand. Miss Marple agreed, her voice soft but firm. The symbols from the ship, the names, the mirrors, they are connected, we must find the pattern. Gatsby, shaken, pointed to the portrait. That woman, she's watching us, I swear it. As if in response, the portrait's eyes shifted, locking onto his. A low laugh filled the room, the same guttural sound from the ship, and the fire flared, casting the woman's shadow across the table. It stretched, impossibly long, its fingers reaching for Gatsby's throat. He fired his revolver, the bullet shattering a vase, but the shadow recoiled, fading into the walls. The envelopes on the table vibrated, as if alive. Poirot opened his again, finding a new message. The first test is trust. Choose wisely, or she will take you. Miss Marple's read. The past is never buried. Gatsby's, predictably, mentioned Daisy. Her light is your doom. The room grew colder, the whispers louder, and the mirrors, now uncovered, began to hum, each reflecting that same cursed forest. They decided to search the mansion, hoping to uncover their host's identity or the source of the horror. The upper floors were a labyrinth of locked doors and shadowed hallways, the air thick with the stench of rot. In a locked study, they found a journal, its pages yellowed and stained with what looked like blood. The entries, written in the same script as their letters, described a ritual, a summoning gone wrong, a pact with something ancient and hungry. The final entry read, They come tonight, the three. The game is set. The shadow will feed, as they read. The house groaned and the floor tilted, forcing them to brace against the walls. The journal fell, its pages scattering, and a photograph slipped out. A woman identical to the portrait, her eyes hollow, her hands clutching a black envelope. Behind her stood the figure from the mirror, its face still obscured, but its presence undeniable. Gatsby whispered, Daisy. But Poirot shook his head. This is not your Daisy, monsieur. This is something older, something that wears her face. The chapter ends with a scream from the lower floors, followed by silence. The trio, armed with the journal and their resolve, descend the stairs, the mirrors watching their every step. The fog outside presses against the windows, and the green light flickers briefly, a beacon in the dark. Whatever awaits them in West Egg, it is only beginning. The scream that had pierced the mansion's oppressive silence lingered in the air like a venomous fog, drawing Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, and Jay Gatsby down the grand staircase of Gatsby's West Egg estate. The mirrors lining the walls seemed to pulse, their surfaces rippling with glimpses of that cursed forest from the dining hall, gnarled trees under a bleeding sky, and the fleeting shadow of the too tall figure that had haunted them since the SS. Elysium. The journal they'd found, with its cryptic warnings of a shadow and a failed ritual, weighed heavily in Poirot's gloved hands. Miss Marple clutched her knitting bag, her calm exterior masking the dread coiling in her chest. Gatsby, his revolver drawn, led the way, his eyes darting toward the windows, searching for the green light that anchored his heart to Daisy Buchanan. The foyer was darker now, the chandelier's light dimmed to a sickly yellow. The scream had come from the lower floors, possibly the servants' quarters or the cellar, but the house seemed to distort sound, making its source impossible to pinpoint. The air was colder, thick with the stench of decay that had followed them from the ship. Poirot paused at the base of the stairs, his mustache twitching as he scanned the room. "This house, it plays tricks, mes amis. It is not merely a place, it is a predator." Miss Marple nodded, her sharp eyes catching a faint smear of crimson on the marble floor, leading toward a door half hidden behind a tapestry. "We are being guided," she said softly, "but not by kindness." Gatsby, his voice tight, gripped his revolver tighter. "If this is about Daisy, I'll end it myself. Whatever it is." His words were brave, but his hands trembled, betraying the fear that gnawed at his carefully crafted facade. The tapestry, embroidered with scenes of a hunt gone wrong, hounds tearing at their masters, felt warm to the touch, as if alive. Poirot pulled it aside, revealing a narrow door carved with the same spiraling symbols from the Elysium's bulkheads. The crimson smear ended at its threshold, and the door creaked open without a touch, exhaling a gust of frigid air that carried whispers. "Come, see, no." The trio exchanged glances, their resolve tested but unbroken. They stepped through, descending a stone staircase that spiraled into darkness. The cellar was vast, its walls slick with moisture and etched with more symbols, glowing faintly in the torchlight. The air was heavy, oppressive, as if the house itself were breathing. At the center of the chamber stood a figure cloaked in black, its face obscured by a hood. The butler from earlier lay crumpled at its feet, his body twisted, his eyes frozen in a scream. The figure did not move, yet its presence filled the room, a weight that pressed against their minds. Poirot raised his torch, his voice steady. "You are our host, I presume. It is time to reveal your purpose." The figure's head tilted, and a voice, low, layered, as if spoken by many, echoed through the chamber. "You were chosen, each, for a truth you hide. The game is simple. Confess or be consumed." The words carried a hunger, a malice that made the walls tremble. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her rosary, her mind racing through decades of secrets, wondering which one had drawn her here. Gatsby stepped forward, his revolver aimed at the figure. "If you know about Daisy, say it. What do you want? With her?" The figure laughed, the same guttural sound from the ship and dining hall, and the shadows on the walls stretched, forming claws that scraped at the stone. "Your Daisy is a lie," it said, its voice curling around Gatsby like a noose. "She is a mask for what you truly fear." The figure raised a hand and the air shimmered, revealing a vision. Daisy, standing in the cursed forest from the mirrors, her eyes black, her smile cruel. Gatsby staggered, his revolver clattering to the floor. "No, that's not her." Poirot, undeterred, stepped closer, his little gray cells working furiously. "You speak of truths, monsieur, but you hide your own. What are you? Why this charade?" The figure's hood shifted, revealing a glimpse of a face, or the absence of one. Where features should have been was a void, a swirling darkness that seemed to drink the light. Miss Marple gasped, her prayer faltering. "This is no man," she whispered. "This is something older, something wrong." The figure gestured, and the cellar walls pulsed, the symbols flaring brighter. The journal in Poirot's hand grew hot, its pages flipping open to a new entry that hadn't been there before. "The shadow feeds on secrets. The three must break, or all will fall." The butler's body twitched, its limbs jerking as if puppeted by invisible strings. Its mouth opened, and a voice, not its own, spoke. "Confess, or join us." The body rose, its movements unnatural, its eyes glowing with the same malevolence as the figures. Gatsby lunged for his revolver, but the shadows moved faster, wrapping around his wrists like chains. Poirot swung his cane, striking the butler's corpse, but it only laughed, its voice joined by others from the walls. Miss Marple, her calm shattering, recited a verse from memory, a ward against evil she'd learned as a girl. The shadows recoiled, but only for a moment. The figure clapped its hands and the cellar shook, stones cracking as if the house were screaming. "You cannot hide," the figure said. "Your secrets are mine." It pointed at each in turn. To Poirot, "The case you buried." To Miss Marple, "The sin you forgave." To Gatsby, "The love you stole." The words cut deeper than any blade, and the trio felt their minds invaded, memories surfacing unbidden. Poirot's failure in Antwerp, a case that cost innocent lives. Miss Marple's silence over a murder in St. Mary Mead. Gatsby's desperate lies to win Daisy's heart. The figure fed on their pain, its void face pulsing with satisfaction. The cellar door slammed shut, trapping them. The shadows grew thicker, forming shapes, figures from their pasts, their victims, their regrets. Poirot saw a young woman, her throat slit, accusing him with silent eyes. Miss Marple faced a child, pale and weeping, whose death she'd failed to prevent. Gatsby saw Daisy, but not as he knew her, her skin gray, her hands clawing at his heart. "You're not real," he screamed, but the visions pressed closer, their whispers deafening. Poirot, rallying, shouted, "We must resist. This thing thrives on our fear." He grabbed the journal, thrusting it into the torchlight. The symbols on the walls dimmed, and the visions flickered. Miss Marple joined him, her voice steady as she recited another prayer, this one stronger, older. The figure hissed, retreating into the shadows, but not before leaving a final message, burned into the floor. "The next test is sacrifice. Choose, or lose all." The butler's body collapsed, lifeless once more. The shadows receded, and the door creaked open, revealing the foyer above. The trio stumbled out, gasping, their minds reeling from the encounter. The journal, now cold, held a new page, a map of the mansion, with a single room marked in red, the ballroom. Gatsby, shaken, muttered, "This is about her. It's always been about her." Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged a glance, knowing their host was far from finished. As they climbed the stairs, the mirrors hummed, reflecting not their faces, but the figure's void, watching, waiting. The green light flickered, outside closer now, pulsing like a heartbeat. The house groaned and the whispers returned, promising horrors yet to come. The air in Gatsby's West Egg mansion grew heavier as Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, and Jay Gatsby ascended from the cellar, their torchlight casting jagged shadows on the walls. The encounter with the cloaked figure, its void face and taunting words, had left them shaken, their minds raw from the visions of their past sins. The journal, clutched tightly in Poirot's gloved hands, felt like a living thing, its pages warm and pulsing faintly, as if it were whispering secrets of its own. The map within, marked with a red X on the ballroom, was their only guide, but the mansion seemed to shift around them, its corridors twisting, its mirrors humming with malevolent intent. The foyer was no longer the opulent welcome it had been. The chandelier flickered erratically, its crystals clinking like chattering teeth. The covered mirrors now reflected fragments of the cursed forest, its blood-red sky bleeding into the mansion's reality. The green light across the sound pulsed, faintly through the fog, a beacon that drew Gatsby's gaze like a moth to a flame. "Daisy," he murmured, his voice cracking, but Poirot's sharp glance silenced him. "Monsieur Gatsby, we must focus. This house, this entity, it plays upon your heart. Do not let it." Miss Marple, her knitting needles silent for once, studied the crimson smear that had reappeared on the marble floor, now forming a trail toward the ballroom. "The house is leading us," she said, her voice steady but laced with unease. "But I fear what waits at the end of this path." The whispers from the cellar followed them, growing louder, more distinct. Names, pleas, accusations. "You failed me. You lied. You let me die. Each voice tugged at their memories, threatening to unravel their composure. The ballroom doors loomed ahead, carved with the same spiraling symbols from the ship and cellar, now glowing with a sickly green light. The crimson trail stopped at the threshold, pooling into a shape that resembled a handprint, its fingers unnaturally long. Poirot tested the door, finding it unlocked but heavy, as if resisting their entry. With a collective effort, they pushed it open, and a wave of cold air rushed out carrying the stench of decay and something sweeter, like rotting flowers. The ballroom was a cavern of faded grandeur, its parquet floor scuffed and stained, its chandeliers draped in cobwebs that swayed without a breeze. Mirrors lined the walls, uncovered now, each reflecting the cursed forest, but some showed glimpses of their own faces, distorted, eyeless, mouths stretched in silent screams. At the room's center stood a grand piano, its keys yellowed and cracked, playing a faint, discordant melody, though no one touched it. Above it hung a chandelier, larger than any they'd seen, its crystals dripping with a dark, viscous liquid that pooled on the floor below. Gatsby froze, his eyes fixed on a mirror that showed not the forest but Daisy, her dress torn, her hands reaching out as if trapped behind the glass. "Jay," her voice echoed, soft and pleading, but it carried an edge, a wrongness that made his blood run cold. Miss Marple placed a hand on his arm, her voice firm. "It is not her, Mr. Gatsby. It is a trick, meant to break you." Poirot, circling the piano, noted the sheet music, its title scrawled in the same script as their letters, Hymne des Ombres, Hymn of the Shadows. As they approached the piano, the melody grew louder, the notes twisting into a scream. The mirrors vibrated and the reflections shifted, showing scenes from their pasts. Poirot saw the Antwerp case, a young woman's body in an alley, her blood on his hands, a failure he'd buried deep. Miss Marple saw the child from St. Mary, Mead, her small body broken by a crime she'd failed to stop. Gatsby saw Daisy, but not as he loved her, her face cruel, her hands stained with blood, whispering, "You were never enough." The whispers became a chorus, filling the ballroom, and the liquid from the chandelier began to move, forming words on the floor. Confess or be claimed. Poirot, his composure fraying, slammed the piano lid shut, silencing the music. But the mirrors cracked, spiderwebbing as if struck. The liquid words writhed, forming a new message. The shadow knows. A figure appeared in the center of the room, not the cloaked host from the cellar, but a woman, her features shifting between Daisy's beauty and the hollow-eyed figure from the portrait in the dining hall. She wore a white dress, stained with crimson, and her smile was a wound. "You cannot hide," she said, her voice a blend of Daisy's softness and something ancient, guttural. "Your secrets are mine." She pointed at Poirot. The detective who failed, at Miss Marple. The saint who sinned, at Gatsby. The dreamer who lied. Gatsby lunged toward her, his revolver raised, but the figure vanished, reappearing in a mirror, her laughter echoing through the room. The mirrors began to bleed, dark liquid seeping from their cracks, pooling at their feet. The piano played again, faster, its keys moving in a frenzy. Poirot grabbed the journal, flipping to the map, which now showed a new mark, a hidden O, room behind the ballroom's northern wall. "We must find this place," he said, his voice urgent. "It holds answers." They searched the wall, finding a panel concealed behind a mirror. It opened with a groan, revealing a narrow passage lined with more mirrors, each reflecting their distorted selves. The whispers followed, now screaming their secrets. Poirot's guilt, Marple's silence, Gatsby's obsession. The passage led to a small chamber, its walls covered in photographs, hundreds of them, pinned like trophies. Each showed a person, their eyes scratched out, their faces frozen in terror. Among them were images of the trio, taken in moments they thought private. Poirot in his London flat, Marple in her garden, Gatsby on his balcony, staring at the green light. At the chamber's center was a table, and on it 3 new envelopes, black and silver. Poirot opened his, finding a single photograph. The young woman from Antwerp, her throat slit, but her eyes alive, staring at him. Miss Marple's held a picture of the child from St. Mary Mead, her small hand reaching out. Gatsby's showed, Daisy. But her face was the void from the cellar, her smile a black abyss. A note accompanied each. Confess, or she takes you. The chamber shook, and the photographs began to move, their subjects crawling out of the frames, their eyeless, faces turning toward the trio. The whispers became screams, and the mirrors shattered, glass raining down. The woman from the ballroom appeared again, her form flickering between Daisy and the void-faced entity. Choose, she said, her voice a chorus of the damned. One, must confess or all will fall. Poirot, his mind racing, clutched the journal, its pages now burning with new words. The shadow feeds on truth withheld. Break the cycle, or be broken. Miss Marple, her faith tested, began to speak, her voice trembling as she recounted the murder she'd concealed, the guilt that had haunted her. The figures paused, their screams faltering, but the woman laughed. Not enough, she hissed. Gatsby, desperate, began to confess his lies to Daisy, but the woman's laughter grew louder, the mirrors closing in. The chapter ends with the chamber collapsing, the trio fleeing back to the ballroom as the walls crack and the mirrors scream. The green light outside pulses brighter and the woman's voice echoes. The next test is betrayal. They clutch the journal, their only guide, as the house groans, promising more horrors to come.
The ballroom of Gatsby's West Egg mansion trembled as Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, and Jay Gatsby stumbled out of the collapsing chamber, shards of shattered mirrors crunching beneath their feet. The air was thick with the acrid stench of decay, mingled with the sickly sweet rot of flowers, and the whispers, those relentless, accusing voices, followed them, weaving through the walls. You cannot run, you cannot hide, she sees. The journal in Poirot's hands pulsed faintly, its map now smudged with fresh blood, the red X on the ballroom replaced by a new mark, a guest wing on the mansion's eastern side. The woman's final words from the chamber echoed in their minds. The next test is betrayal. The trio paused in the ballroom, their breaths visible in the freezing air. The mirrors, though broken, still reflected fragments of the cursed forest, its blood-red sky now streaked with black, as if the heavens were rotting. The green light across the sound pulsed erratically, its rhythm no longer a beacon but a warning. Gatsby, his face pale, clutched his revolver, his eyes darting to the windows. This isn't just about Daisy anymore, he whispered, though his voice betrayed his obsession. It's about all of us. Poirot, his mustache bristling, adjusted his grip on the journal. Monsieur Gatsby, we are pawns in a game we do not yet understand. But this house, this shadow, it feeds on our weaknesses. We must remain vigilant. Miss Marple, her knitting bag slung over her shoulder, nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the ballroom. The piano was silent now, but the chandelier above dripped its dark, viscous liquid, forming new words on the floor. The guest awaits. Find them, or lose them. A faint knock echoed from the foyer, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the whispers. The trio froze, their nerves frayed. Another player? Miss Marple murmured, her fingers brushing her rosary. Poirot led the way, his cane tapping the floor, each step measured but tense. The foyer was darker, the chandelier's light extinguished, and the covered mirrors seemed to hum, as if eager to unveil more horrors. The knock came again, from the front doors, now slightly ajar, revealing a figure silhouetted against the fog. The newcomer was a woman, young and pale, her dark hair tangled and her dress, an elegant but tattered gown, stained with mud. She clutched a black envelope, identical to theirs, and her eyes, wide with fear, darted between them. You are them, she said, her voice trembling. The letter said to come. It said you'd be here. She held out the envelope, her hands shaking. The script was the same. Miss Eleanor Vance, you are summoned to West Egg. The truth awaits. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Mademoiselle Vance, how did you come to be here? The name was familiar, one of the name cards from the dining hall in chapter 2. Eleanor hesitated, her gaze flickering to the shadows. I don't know. I was in Boston, and then, the letter came. I couldn't refuse. It knew things, about Hill House, about my sister. Her voice broke, and the mirrors hummed louder, as if feeding on her fear. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle but probing. What did it know, dear? Eleanor's lips quivered. It knew I left her. That I ran when she needed me. The confession hung in the air, and the shadows on the walls thickened, forming shapes that seemed to reach for her. Gatsby, his own secrets raw, snapped, we are all here for the same reason. Something wants us to break. Before they could question her further, the doors slammed shut, and the foyer plunged into darkness. The whispers surged, now screaming Eleanor's name. Eleanor, you failed, you ran. A cold wind tore through the room, extinguishing their torches, and when the lights flickered back, Eleanor was gone. Her envelope lay on the floor, torn open, a new message scrawled inside. She is mine. Find her, or join her. Poirot knelt, examining the floor. A fresh trail of crimson led toward the guest wing, the same direction as the journal's new mark. This is no coincidence, he said, his voice tight. The shadow is testing us, as it promised. Betrayal awaits. Miss Marple's eyes were grim. Poor girl. She's part of the game now, but I fear she's not the first to vanish. Gatsby, his revolver drawn, led the way, his obsession with Daisy warring with the need to survive. The guest wing was a maze of opulent rooms, each door carved with the spiraling symbols that haunted them. The crimson trail wove through the halls, splitting and rejoining, as if mocking their efforts to follow it. The mirrors here were uncovered, reflecting not the forest but scenes of Eleanor, running through a dark house, her face twisted in terror, pursued by a shadow with no face. The whispers grew louder, now joined by Eleanor's voice, pleading, help me, it's here. They entered a guest room, its walls lined with portraits of strangers, their eyes scratched out, just like the photographs in the chamber. A mirror in the corner showed Eleanor, pounding on the glass from the other side, her mouth open in a silent scream. Gatsby fired at the mirror, shattering it, but the shards reformed, the image intact. Poirot grabbed the journal, its pages flipping to a new entry. The guest is the key. Her truth unlocks the door. Betray, or be betrayed. The room shook, and the portraits began to bleed, dark liquid seeping from their frames. Eleanor's voice screamed from the walls, joined by others, the names from the dining hall, the victims of the shadow. The crimson trail moved, slithering like a snake toward a locked door at the hall's end. Miss Marple, her faith faltering, whispered a prayer, but the words felt hollow. This house, she said, it's alive with their pain. They forced the door open, revealing a nursery, its walls painted with faded murals of children playing. A rocking chair moved slowly, though no one sat in it. Eleanor's envelope lay on a crib, now empty, but a faint cry echoed from within. The mirrors in the room showed not Eleanor but the trio, their faces distorted, their eyes void-like, mimicking the shadow. Poirot's torch flickered, revealing a hidden panel behind the crib. Inside was a locket, engraved with Eleanor's initials, and a photograph of a young girl, her face scratched out. The nursery shook, and Eleanor's voice screamed, you let me go. The mirrors cracked, and the shadows lunged, their claws grazing Gatsby's arm, drawing blood. Poirot swung his cane, shattering a mirror, but the shadows only laughed, retreating into the walls. Miss Marple clutched the locket, her mind racing. This is her secret, she said. Her sister, she abandoned her to something like this. The journal burned in Poirot's hands, a new message appearing. Betray one to save the rest. Choose. The shadows returned, forming a circle around them, and Eleanor's figure appeared, her eyes black, her hands clawing at the air. You failed me, she hissed, her voice blending with the shadows. The green light outside flared, and the nursery doors slammed shut, trapping them. The chapter ends with the trio facing an impossible choice, the shadows closing in, and Eleanor screams echoing. The journal's map shifts, marking a new location, the attic, where the truth of the vanishing guest may lie. The house groans, and the whispers promise betrayal, as the green light pulses like a heartbeat in the fog.
The nursery's walls trembled as Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, and Jay Gatsby fled the collapsing room, the screams of Eleanor Vance echoing in their ears. The shadows had lunged, their claws grazing Gatsby's arm, leaving a wound that burned with an unnatural cold. The journal in Poirot's hands pulsed like a heartbeat, its pages stained with fresh ink, the map now pointing to the attic, a place marked with a jagged red symbol that seemed to writhe. On the page, the shadow's last words, "Betray one to save the rest," hung over them like a guillotine, its threat of betrayal tightening the noose around their fragile alliance. The mansion's air grew colder as they climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, the steps creaking under their weight, each groan sounding like a warning. The green light across the sound flickered through the fog, its pulse erratic as if mirroring the house's malevolent rhythm. The mirrors lining the stairwell hummed, their surfaces rippling with glimpses of the cursed forest. But now they showed Eleanor, her face pale, her eyes black voids pounding on the glass from within. Her voice, distorted and layered with the shadows, whispered, "You let me go. You all let me go." Poirot, his torch flickering, led the way, his little gray cells straining to piece together the puzzle. "This attic, mes amis, it holds the key to Mademoiselle Vance's fate, and perhaps our own. We must find the clues before the shadow forces our hand." Miss Marple, clutching Eleanor's locket from the nursery, nodded, her sharp mind sifting through the fragments of the mystery. "This house is a trap," she said softly, "and poor Eleanor was bait. But for what?" Gatsby, his revolver drawn, his wounded arm trembling, muttered, "It's still about Daisy. It has to be." His obsession clung to him, even as the house seemed to feed on it. The attic door was iron, rusted and heavy, carved with the same spiraling symbols that haunted every corner of the mansion. The crimson trail from the nursery ended here, pooling into a shape that resembled a clawed footprint. The door groaned open, exhaling a gust of air that smelled of dust, blood, and something ancient. Something alive. The attic was a cavernous space, its rafters draped in cobwebs that pulsed like veins, its floor littered with broken furniture and trunks that seemed to shift in the shadows. The mirrors here were ancient, their frames warped, their surfaces clouded but still reflecting the cursed forest, now teeming with shapes that moved just out of sight. A single lantern hung from the ceiling, its flame casting a sickly yellow glow. Beneath it lay a circle of candles, unlit but arranged in a pattern matching the journal symbols. At its center was a book, bound in black leather, its cover etched with the words, Liber Umbrarum, Book of Shadows. Poirot approached cautiously, his cane tapping the floor, which felt soft as if it might give way. "This is no ordinary attic," he said, his voice low. "It is a shrine to something unholy." Miss Marple knelt beside the candles, her fingers brushing the wax which was warm and pliable as if recently molded. "These are not for light," she murmured. "They're for a ritual." Gatsby, his eyes darting to the mirror, saw Daisy's face again, her smile cruel, her hands dripping with blood. He staggered, his revolver slipping from his grasp. "She's here," he whispered. "She's always been here." The mirrors laughed, a low, guttural sound that shook the rafters. Poirot opened the Liber Umbrarum, its pages brittle and stained with what looked like blood. The text was in Latin, but fragments were scrawled in English in the same script as their letters. It spoke of a pact made centuries ago, a summoning of the shadow, a being that fed on secrets, binding its victims to a game of confession and betrayal. The final page listed names, some crossed out, others circled: Eleanor Vance, Jonathan Harker, Annabel Lee, and their own. Beside Eleanor's name was a single word: taken. The candles flared to life without warning, their flames green and cold, casting shadows that danced like figures in a grotesque ballet. The mirrors vibrated, and Eleanor's image appeared again, her hands clawing at the glass, her voice screaming, "You betrayed me!" The shadows on the walls thickened, forming the cloaked figure from the cellar, its void face pulsing with hunger. "Choose," it said, its voice a chorus of the damned. "One must fall, or all will." Gatsby, driven by desperation, shouted, "I'll confess. I lied to Daisy. I built everything for her, but it was never enough." His words echoed, and the shadows recoiled, but only for a moment. The figure laughed, its voice cutting through him. "Your confession is weak. The shadow demands more." Miss Marple, her hands trembling, began to speak of the murder she'd concealed in St. Mary Mead, but the figure hissed, "Not enough." Poirot, his mind racing, clutched the book, reading aloud a passage about breaking the ritual. "The truth must be whole, or the shadow will claim all." The attic shook, the floor buckling, and the mirrors cracked, revealing glimpses of Eleanor, trapped in the cursed forest, surrounded by figures with no faces. The candles flared brighter, and the shadows lunged, their claws grazing Miss Marple's shawl, tearing it. Poirot swung his torch, shattering a mirror, but the shards floated, reforming into a new image. The woman from the ballroom, her face shifting between Daisy's and the void, her eyes burning with malice. The liber umbrarum burned in Poirot's hands, a new page appearing. "The clue lies in the betrayed. Find her truth or lose your own." The shadows retreated, but the mirrors began to bleed, dark liquid pooling on the floor, forming a trail toward a locked trunk in the corner. Gatsby, his wound now black and spreading, forced the trunk open, revealing a bundle of letters, Eleanor's, addressed to her sister, confessing her guilt for abandoning her to a house that ate her soul. A photograph fell out, showing Eleanor and her sister in front of a mansion, Hill House, its windows like eyes. The attic groaned and the lantern exploded, plunging them into darkness. Eleanor's screams filled the air, joined by the shadow's laughter. When the candles flared back, the trunk was empty, and the mirrors showed not Eleanor but the trio, their faces melting into voids. The figure reappeared, its voice a whisper. "Betrayal is near. Choose, or she takes you all." The chapter ends with the attic collapsing, the trio fleeing down the stairs as the mirrors scream and the shadows pursue. The journal's map shifts, marking a new location, the garden, where Eleanor's truth may lie. The green light pulses brighter and the house's whispers promise a reckoning as the shadow's game tightens its grip. The attic's collapse drove Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, and Jay Gatsby down the creaking staircase of the West Egg mansion, their hearts pounding as the mirrors screamed and the shadows clawed at their heels. The journal, clutched tightly in Poirot's gloved hands, burned with a new map, its red mark now pointing to the garden, a place of supposed beauty now tainted by the house's malevolence. The shadow's laughter echoed behind them, its voice layered with Eleanor Vance's screams and the promise of betrayal. "Choose, or she takes you all." The green light across the sound pulsed erratically, its glow seeping through the fog like a wound in the night. The mansion's corridors twisted as they descended, the walls seeming to breathe, their surfaces slick with a dark, oily sheen. The mirrors, cracked but unyielding, reflected fragments of the cursed forest, its blood-red sky now swirling with black clouds that pulsed like a heartbeat. Gatsby's wound from the shadow's claw in the attic throbbed with an unnatural cold, the black veins spreading up his arm. He gripped his revolver, his eyes haunted by the vision of Daisy's cruel, void-like face. "This ends tonight," he growled, though his voice trembled with doubt. "I won't let it take her." Poirot, his little gray cells racing, adjusted his grip on the journal, its pages warm and pulsing. "Monsieur Gatsby, your obsession blinds you. The shadow uses it as it uses all our weaknesses. We must uncover its motive. Why us? Why now?" Miss Marple, her shawl torn from the attic's assault, clutched Eleanor's locket, its weight a reminder of the vanished guest. "The garden," she said softly. "It's where the truth is buried. But I fear what we'll unearth." The foyer was a graveyard of light. The chandelier extinguished, its crystals dripping with the same dark liquid that had plagued them since the ballroom. The crimson trail from the nursery reappeared, snaking toward the garden doors which stood ajar, exhaling a gust of cold air that smelled of earth and decay. The whispers followed, now a chorus of voices. Eleanor's, the butler's, the names. From the dining hall, accusing, pleading, "You failed. You lied. You betrayed." The garden was a twisted mockery of beauty, its roses black and wilted, their thorns glistening as if wet with blood. The fog hung low, curling around statues of cherubs whose faces were carved into screams. The green light pulsed brighter, closer, as if drawn to the garden's heart. The trail led to a fountain, its basin filled with a dark, viscous liquid that rippled without a breeze. At its center stood a stone figure, a woman, her face obscured, her hands outstretched as if beckoning. The journal trembled, its pages flipping to a new entry. The garden holds the shadow's heart. Unravel its motive or become its prey. Poirot circled the fountain, his torch revealing symbols etched into the stone. Spirals, claws, eyes that seemed to watch. "This is no mere garden," he said, his voice tight. "It is a place of sacrifice." Miss Marple knelt, examining the soil, which was soft and warm, as if alive. Her fingers brushed a buried object. A child's toy, a doll with its eyes scratched out, identical to the photographs in the chamber. "This belongs to Eleanor's sister," she whispered, her heart sinking. The shadow took her too. Gatsby, his wound now burning, staggered toward the fountain, drawn by a faint sound. A woman's voice singing softly like daisies, but wrong, layered with the shadow's guttural tone. The liquid in the basin bubbled, forming Daisy's face, her eyes black voids, her smile a slash of crimson. "Jay," she whispered, "you betrayed me." He raised his revolver, but Poirot grabbed his arm. "It is not her, monsieur. It is the shadow playing its game." The garden shook, the statue's eyes glowing green, and the whispers became screams. The stone woman moved, her head turning to face them, her face a void like the cloaked figures. "You seek my motive," she said, her voice a chorus of the damned. "I am the truth you deny, the secrets you bury. Confess, or feed me." The fountain erupted, its liquid rising into tendrils that lashed at them, burning where they touched. Gatsby fired, the bullet striking the stone figure, but it only laughed, the sound shaking the earth. The journal burned, a new page revealing a ritual. The shadow was born of betrayal, bound by blood. Break the cycle or join it. Poirot read aloud, his voice steady despite the chaos. "This entity, it thrives on our guilt, our hidden truths. It wants us to turn on each other." Miss Marple, clutching the doll, nodded. Eleanor's sister was its first victim here. Her betrayal drew the shadow to this place. The garden's roses bloomed, their petals splitting to reveal mouths, whispering their secrets. Poirot's failure in Antwerp, Marple's silence in St. Mary Mead, Gatsby's lies to Daisy. The tendrils, from the fountain lunged, wrapping around Gatsby's legs, pulling him toward the basin. He screamed, firing wildly, but the liquid tightened, its touch searing his skin. Miss Marple, her faith tested, recited a prayer, her voice trembling but resolute. The tendrils recoiled, but the stone woman advanced, her void face pulsing with hunger. Poirot, desperate, opened the Liberum Brarum from the attic, finding a passage about the garden. The heart of the shadow lies in the betrayed. Offer a truth, or offer a life. The mirrors in the garden, hidden among the roses, began to reflecting Eleanor, her sister, and the trio, their faces melting into voids. Eleanor's voice screamed, "You let me go." And the ground split, revealing a pit filled with bones, some fresh, some ancient, all etched with the same symbols. Gatsby, freed from the tendrils, collapsed, his wound now a network of black veins across his chest. "I'll confess," he gasped. "I stole her. I lied to her. I built everything for a dream that wasn't real." The garden stilled, the whispers faltering, but the stone woman laughed. "Not enough. Miss Marple, tears in her eyes, spoke of the murder she'd concealed, the guilt that had shaped her life. The mirrors cracked, but the woman hissed, "Still not enough." Poirot, his mind racing, realized the truth. "It wants us to betray each other," he said, "to sacrifice one for the others." The journal burned, a final message appearing. "The garden demands a choice. One must fall." The stone woman pointed at them, and the bones in the pit stirred, rising into skeletal forms that clutched at their ankles. The green light flared, and Daisy's voice, now fully the shadows, echoed, "Choose." The chapter ends with the trio surrounded, the skeletal figures closing in, the stone woman's laughter deafening. The journal's map shifts, marking a new location, the library where the shadow's true motive may lie. The whispers promise betrayal, and the green light pulses like a dying star as the house prepares its next test. The garden of Gatsby's West Egg mansion pulsed with malevolent life, its black roses hissing and the skeletal figures from the bone-filled pit clawing at the air. Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, and Jay Gatsby stood surrounded, the stone woman's void face looming before them, her laughter a blade that cut through the fog. The journal in Poirot's hands burned, its latest message seared into the page. The garden demands a choice. One must fall. The green light across the sound flared, its glow casting a sickly sheen over the scene, and Daisy's voice, twisted by the shadow, echoed from the fountain. "Choose, or I take you all." The skeletal figures, their bones etched with spiraling, symbols moved closer, their empty eye sockets glowing with the same green light. Gatsby's wound, now a web of black veins across his chest, throbbed with each pulse of the light, his revolver trembling in his hand. "This is about her," he gasped, his eyes fixed on the fountain where Daisy's void-faced image flickered. "I won't let it have her." Poirot, his mustache twitching, gripped the Liber Umbrarum, its pages flipping to a new warning. The shadow is born of betrayal. Break the cycle or become it. Miss Marple, clutching Eleanor's locket and the doll from the garden, stood resolute, though her hands shook. "We cannot give in to its demands," she said, her voice steady but strained. "It wants us to turn on each other, to betray as it was betrayed." The stone woman tilted her head, her void face pulsing, and the roses opened their mouths, screaming the trio's secrets. Poirot's failure in Antwerp, Marple's silence in St. Mary Mead, Gatsby's lies to Daisy. The air grew heavier, the fog thickening until it felt like a noose. The fountain's dark liquid surged, forming tendrils that lashed at them, burning where they touched. Poirot dodged, his cane striking a skeletal figure, shattering its arm, but it reformed, its laughter joining the shadows. "You cannot fight me," the stone woman said, her voice a chorus of the damned, Eleanor's, the butler's, the child from the nursery. "Confess or choose." The tendrils wrapped around Miss Marple's legs, pulling her toward the fountain. She cried out, her rosary snapping, beads scattering like tears. Gatsby fired at the fountain, the bullet striking the stone woman. But it passed through her, the liquid absorbing it. "Daisy!" he screamed, lunging forward only for the tendrils to seize him, their touch searing his wounded arm. Poirot, his mind racing, opened the Liber Umbrarum, reading aloud a passage about the shadow's origin. "Born of a betrayed heart, bound by blood, it seeks to recreate its pain. One must fall to sate it, or all will." The words seemed to enrage the shadow, the garden shaking, the statue's screams deafening. Miss Marple, freed by Gatsby's distraction, clutched the doll, her eyes falling on its scratched-out face. "Eleanor's sister," she whispered. "The shadow began with her betrayal. We must find her truth." The stone woman laughed, her form shifting between Daisy and the void, her hands reaching for Gatsby. "You betrayed her first," she hissed, and the fountain showed Daisy, her face melting into Eleanor's, then the child's, all screaming. "You let me go!" Poirot, desperate, scanned the garden for a clue. The crimson trail from the mansion reappeared, leading to a gnarled tree at the garden's edge, its roots twisted into a door-like opening. "There!" he shouted, pointing. The trio fought. Through the skeletal figures, their claws tearing at their clothes, their whispers accusing. "You failed. You lied." Gatsby fired, clearing a path, but his wound slowed him, his vision blurring as the black veins spread. The tree's roots parted, revealing a chamber below, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected not the garden, but Hill House, Eleanor's haunted past. The air was thick with the stench of blood and decay, and at the chamber's center lay a shrine, a pile of bones, a child's dress, and a mirror showing Eleanor, her hands pounding on the glass, her voice pleading, "You betrayed me." The Liber Umbrarum burned, a new page appearing. The shadow's heart is here. Offer a betrayal or offer a life. The stone woman appeared, her void face filling the chamber, her laughter shaking the roots. "Choose," she said, pointing, "at each in turn. One must betray, or all will fall." The mirrors showed their secrets again, Poirot's victim, Marple's child, Gatsby's Daisy, each accusing, each demanding. Gatsby, his strength fading, whispered, "I'll do it. I'll confess everything." He began to speak of Daisy, his lies, his theft, but the shadow laughed. "Not enough. Betray another." Poirot, his eyes narrowing, realized the trap. "It wants us to turn on each other, to name one to die." Miss Marple, her faith nearly broken, clutched the locket, her voice trembling. "I cannot condemn another, but I will confess my sin." She spoke of the murder she'd hidden, the guilt that had shaped her, but the shadow's laughter grew louder, the mirrors cracking, the tendrils lunging. Gatsby, driven to desperation, pointed his revolver at Poirot. "You've been leading us into this," he snarled. "You know more than you say." Poirot's face hardened, but before he could respond, Miss Marple stepped between them, her voice sharp. "Stop. This is what it wants." The shadow clapped, delighted, and the chamber shook, the bones rising into a skeletal figure that wore Eleanor's face, its claws reaching for Gatsby. In a final act of defiance, Poirot threw the Liber Umbrarum into the shrine, its pages igniting. The mirrors screamed, the tendrils recoiled, and the stone woman howled, her form flickering. "You cannot stop me," she roared. But the flames spread, consuming the child's dress. Eleanor's image in the mirror faltered, her voice softening. "Thank you." The chamber collapsed, forcing the trio to flee back to the garden, the roots sealing behind them. The garden was silent, the statues still, the fountain dry. The green light pulsed faintly, and the journal, now charred, showed a new mark. The library where the shadow's truth might finally be revealed. The whispers returned, softer now, but promising more. Betrayal is not done. Gatsby, his wound worse, collapsed, his revolver falling. Poirot and Marple supported him, their alliance strained but unbroken as the house groaned, readying its next test. The garden's silence was a deceptive calm, its black roses still and the fountain dry. But the air in Gatsby's West Egg mansion crackled with dread as Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, and Jay Gatsby stumbled from the collapsing shrine. The journal, charred from the fire in the garden's underground chamber, pulsed faintly in Poirot's hands, its map now pointing to the library, a place marked with a spiraling red symbol that seemed to bleed into the eye. Page, the green light across the sound flickered weakly, its pulse a dying heartbeat mirroring Gatsby's worsening condition. His wound, a network of black veins spreading across his chest, sapped his strength. His revolver now useless in his trembling hand, the shadow's words from the garden echoed, "Betrayal is not done." The mansion's corridors warped as they moved, the walls pulsing like living flesh, the mirrors reflecting fragments of the cursed forest, its blood-red sky now streaked with veins of black. The whispers ever present grew sharper, accusing. "You failed, you lied, you betrayed." Eleanor Vance's screams lingered, her plea, "Thank you." A fleeting hope now drowned by the shadow's laughter. Poirot, his little gray cells straining, clutched the journal. The library, mes amis. It holds the truth of this entity. We must uncover it before it forces our betrayal. Miss Marple, her shawl in tatters, held Eleanor's locket tightly, its weight a reminder of the vanished guest and her sister. "The shadow feeds on our guilt," she said, her voice steady but heavy with sorrow. "But there is more to its story, something older, something tied to this place." Gatsby, leaning on Poirot for support, muttered, "It's still about Daisy. It's always been her." His obsession clung to him even as the black veins pulsed, his eyes haunted by the void-faced Daisy from the garden. The library doors loomed at the end of a shadowed hallway, carved with the spiraling symbols that had haunted them since the SS Elysium. The crimson trail reappeared, snaking beneath the doors, pooling into a shape like a clawed hand. The air was thick with the stench of old paper and blood, and the mirrors, now uncovered, hummed, their surfaces rippling with images of Eleanor, her sister, and the trio, their faces melting into voids. The doors creaked open without a touch, exhaling a gust of frigid air that carried a whisper, "The truth awaits, but it will break you." The library was a labyrinth of towering shelves, their books bound in leather that seemed to breathe, their titles in languages none recognized. A chandelier hung overhead, its crystals dripping with the same dark liquid from the ballroom, forming puddles that writhed on the floor. At the room's center stood a desk, and on it, a single candle burned with a green flame illuminating a book, the Liber Umbrarum from the attic, now open to a page titled The Pact. Beside it lay 3 new envelopes, black and silver, each bearing their names. Poirot approached the desk, his torch flickering as the shadows danced, forming shapes that mimicked the skeletal figures from the garden. He opened the Liber Umbrarum, its pages warm and pulsing, revealing a history of the shadow. Born of a betrayal in this house, a woman scorned, her heart offered to the void. She became the shadow, bound to feed on secrets, to recreate her pain. The text named her Lillian Ashwood, a name etched into the desk. Her betrayal tied to a lover who abandoned her, sealing her fate in a ritual gone wrong. Miss Marple, examining her envelope, found a photograph of Lillian, her face identical to the stone woman, the portrait and Daisy's twisted visage. "This is her," she whispered. "The shadow wears her pain." Gatsby's envelope held a letter in Daisy's handwriting, but the words were Lillian's. "You betrayed me, Jay. You all did." His face paled, the black veins pulsing faster. "It's not her," he said, but his voice broke, doubt creeping in. The candle flared and the library shook, the shelves groaning as books fell, their pages fluttering open to reveal drawings of the shadow's victims. Eleanor, her sister, the butler, and others, their eyes scratched out. The mirrors vibrated, showing Lillian, her void face smiling, her hands clawing at the glass. "You know my truth," she said, her voice a chorus of the damned. "Now give me yours." The shadows lunged, their claws grazing Poirot's coat, tearing the fabric. He swung his cane, shattering a mirror, but it reformed, Lillian's laughter echoing. The Liber Umbrarum burned, a new page appearing. "The truth is a sacrifice. One must break, or all will." The envelopes vibrated, revealing new messages. Poirot's read, "Your failure is your chain." Marple's, "Your silence is your sin." Gatsby's, "Your love is your lie." The library's air grew colder, the puddles on the floor rising into tendrils that lashed at them, burning where they touched. Gatsby fired, the bullet striking a shelf, but the books screamed, their pages bleeding ink. Miss Marple, her faith wavering, clutched the locket, her mind racing. Lillian's betrayal began here, in this house. We must find her heart, her anchor. She noticed a hidden panel behind the desk, revealed by the candle's light. Inside was a diary, Lillian's, its pages filled with her anguish, her lover's abandonment, her pact with the void, her transformation into the shadow. The final entry read, "They will come, the 3, to play my game. Their truths will feed me, or their betrayal will free me. The library shook, the mirrors cracking, and Lillian's form emerged from the candle's flame, her void face pulsing with hunger. "Choose," she hissed, pointing at them. "Betray one, or I take all." The shadows formed figures from their pasts. Poirot's victim, Marple's child, Gatsby's Daisy, each accusing, each demanding. Gatsby, his strength fading, raised his revolver, his eyes on Poirot. "You've led us to this," he whispered, the shadow's influence twisting his mind. Poirot, his voice calm but urgent, said, "Monsieur, this is the trap. We must resist, or we become her." Miss Marple, tears in her eyes, began to confess. Her silence, but Lillian laughed. "Not enough." The tendrils seized Gatsby, pulling him toward a mirror where Daisy's void face waited, her hands reaching. Poirot threw the diary into the candle, its flames flaring green, and the mirrors screamed, the shadows recoiling. Lillian howled, her form flickering, but the library collapsed, forcing the trio to flee. The chapter ends with the trio escaping to the foyer, the journal marking a new location, the master bedroom, where the shadow's heart may lie. The green light pulses faintly, and Lillian's laughter echoes, promising a final reckoning. The whispers grow louder. "Betrayal is your truth." The final reckoning, the foyer of Gatsby's West Egg mansion, was a frozen tomb, its air thick with the stench of decay and the echoes of Lillian Ashwood's laughter. Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, and Jay Gatsby staggered from the collapsing library, their bodies battered, their minds frayed by the shadow's relentless game. The journal in Poirot's hands, charred and pulsing, now pointed to the master bedroom, a final red mark that bled across the page, its spiraling symbol a promise of reckoning. The green light across the sound flickered faintly, its pulse a dying gasp, mirroring Gatsby's fading strength. His wound, a web of black veins now covering half his body, sapped his life, his revolver hanging limp in his hand. The shadow's words from the library haunted them. "Betrayal is your truth." The mansion's corridors twisted as they climbed, to the master bedroom, the walls oozing a dark, viscous liquid that burned where it touched. The mirrors, cracked but alive, reflected the cursed forest, its blood-red sky now a void of black, with Lillian's void-faced figure watching from every surface. The whispers, Eleanor Vance's, the butler's, the child's, screamed their accusations. "You failed. You lied. You betrayed." Poirot, his little gray cells burning with urgency, clutched the Liber Umbrarum. "This bedroom, mes amis, it is the heart of the shadow. We must end this, or it ends us." Miss Marple, her torn shawl clutched tightly, held Eleanor's locket and the doll, her faith nearly shattered. "Lillian's pain began here," she said, her voice trembling. "Her betrayal, her pact. It's all tied to this room." Gatsby, his eyes haunted by Daisy's twisted visage, whispered, "She's here. I can feel her." His obsession with Daisy, now tangled with Lillian's malevolence, threatened to break him. The black veins pulsed, and he stumbled, supported by Poirot's steady hand. The master bedroom doors were massive, carved with symbols that glowed with a sickly green light. The crimson trail from the garden and library ended here, pooling into a shape like a heart, its edges jagged and bleeding. The doors opened with a groan, exhaling a gust of air that smelled of blood and roses. The room was a shrine to despair, a four-poster bed draped in black silk, its canopy torn and swaying. Mirrors covered every wall, reflecting not the room, but Hill House, the cursed forest, and Lillian's void face, her smile a wound. At the bed's center lay a heart-shaped locket, identical to Eleanor's but larger, pulsing with a green glow. Poirot approached the bed, his torch flickering as the shadows danced, forming claws that scraped the floor. The Liber Umbrarum burned, its final page revealing the shadow's truth. Lillian Ashwood, betrayed by love, offered her heart to the void. Her pact binds her to this house, feeding on secrets, demanding betrayal. Destroy her heart, or become her. The locket pulsed faster, and the mirrors hummed, showing the trio's faces melting into voids, their eyes accusing. Miss Marple, her hands shaking, opened the locket, revealing a photograph of Lillian and her lover. A man whose face was scratched out, but whose silhouette resembled Gatsby's. "You," she whispered, turning to him. "You're connected to her." Gatsby staggered, his wound flaring. "No, it's Daisy, not her." But the mirrors showed Daisy's face merging with Lillian's, their voices blending. "You betrayed me, Jay." The room shook, the beds, silk writhing like snakes, and Lillian's form emerged from the locket's glow, her void face towering, her hands claws of shadow. "Choose," she roared, her voice a chorus of the damned. Eleanor, her sister, the butler, all screaming. "One must betray or all will fall." The mirrors cracked, bleeding dark liquid, and the shadows lunged, their claws tearing at Poirot's coat, Marple's shawl, Gatsby's flesh. The green light outside flared, flooding the room, and Daisy's voice, now fully Lillian's, echoed, "Give me one, or I take all." Poirot, his mind racing, read the final passage aloud. "The heart must burn, but betrayal must seal it." He realized the truth. The locket was Lillian's anchor, but destroying it required a sacrifice, a betrayal of their own. Gatsby, his strength fading, raised his revolver, his eyes on Poirot. "You knew," he growled, the shadow's influence twisting his mind. "You led us here to die." Miss Marple stepped between them, her voice sharp. "Stop. This is her trap." But the shadow seized her, pulling her toward a mirror where Eleanor's face screamed, "You let me go." Gatsby fired, the bullet grazing Poirot's arm, drawing blood. The shadow laughed, delighted, and the locket pulsed faster, the room collapsing around them. Poirot, ignoring the pain, grabbed the locket, thrusting it into the liber umbrarum's flames. The mirrors screamed, the shadows howled, and Lillian's form flickered, her void face contorting in rage. "You cannot stop me," she roared, but the flames spread, consuming the locket. Miss Marple, freed from the shadows, confessed her silence, her voice breaking. "I hid a murder to protect the innocent, but it cost a life." The mirrors cracked further, and Eleanor's image softened, her screams fading. Gatsby, tears streaming, confessed his lies to Daisy, his theft, his obsession. "I built a dream that wasn't real," he sobbed. The shadows recoiled and Lillian's form weakened, but she lunged, her claws aimed at Poirot. In a final act, Poirot confessed his failure in Antwerp, the case that haunted him, the lives he couldn't save. "I am not perfect," he said, his voice steady, "but I will end this." He threw the burning liber umbrarum into the bed, the flames engulfing the silk, the locket, the heart of the shadow. Lillian screamed, her form dissolving into the mirrors which shattered, revealing the cursed forest collapsing into darkness. The mansion groaned, its walls cracking, the green light extinguished. The trio stumbled to the foyer, the house collapsing around them. The journal, now ash, fell from Poirot's hands. Its final message burned into their minds. The truth breaks the cycle. The whispers ceased, and the fog lifted, revealing the dawn. Gatsby, his wound fading, stared at the empty sound, Daisy's light gone. Miss Marple clutched the doll, her faith restored but scarred. Poirot, bloodied but resolute, led them out, the mansion crumbling behind them. The chapter ends with the trio standing on the shore, the wreckage of the mansion a silent testament to their victory. But as they turned away, a faint whisper lingered. "I am not gone." The shadow's game was over, but its echo remained, a warning of truths yet to be faced.